We are back. It is Mick Walker on the other side of your screen. It's Spencer Holbrook here. It is the Lettermen Lounge podcast on the Lettermen Live podcast feed, the Lettermen Row YouTube channel, and at lettermenrow.com, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you like the video or the podcast, subscribe to the podcast feed, or subscribe to the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. Then go over to lettermenrow.com, get yourself a membership there as well. Everything you can do, go ahead and do it. It's Lettermen Row. It's Mick Walker. It's Spencer Holbrook. We're going to talk Ohio State recruiting today. Maybe a little bit of stuff how it relates to the current team because of some staffing changes. Obviously, the Buckeyes going through some hiring processes right now. Mick, I want to start off with this though. A lot of talk about Mark Pantoni here recently. It is National Signing Day technically for the February period, even though nobody really signs anybody. During this period, I think there's like 10 of the top 300 that have to be signed today. That's kind of nuts. Yeah. But Mark Pantoni was named one of the off-field recruiting stars of the 2025 cycle by Steve Wiltfong. Do you think Steve Wiltfong wrote this in like 2018 and just copies and pastes the same thing every year? Because it seems like Mark is in this category every single year as one of the stars, the off-field stars. As salaries keep going up, Mick, in this profession of GMs and personnel directors, as they become more and more important in this space, I think that we don't talk enough about Mark Pantoni. So I just wanted to give us a couple minutes here to talk about the impact that he has on what's going on behind the scenes, specifically right now when all of these coaching moves are happening and Mark is kind of in charge of helping keep this thing together.
Yeah, I think whenever we get 10, 20 years down the road, and there's more of a foundation for the recruiting era, the stuff that's been tracked and followed in these GMs. If you write a book about it, if Spencer or whoever wants to write a book, Steve, you have to mention Mark Pantoni as one of the pillars of what this industry has kind of become, not only making recruiting for recruiting departments at colleges, this industry, but also it makes kind of my job and the other jobs that people that cover recruiting possible because there's people that are so attentive to that topic. Obviously, like you said, in an era where you have USC paying their GM over $1 million, Alabama is also paying their GM over $1 million. I assume Mark Pantoni, who is working through a contract, who has had his contract expire at the end of January, is probably going to get into that range because he's well worth it for Ohio State. He was out on the road during January as well when some of the coaches were back in Columbus focused on recruiting. So he's been a pillar for Ohio State's recruiting department for years under Urban Meyer, still under Ryan Day. You and I talked about in the car driving back from Atlanta, but one of the few guys that's still a holdover from the Urban Meyer staff to kind of keep the organizational pillars in place. So Mark Pantoni deserves all the flowers we could possibly give him, Steve, we give him. And I think Ryan Day even says that on that. He said it during December. Any assistant would say that. So it's a big day for these guys. Obviously, it was a bigger day years ago when everybody would sign in February, but still to be able to get the 25 class in the books, completely change everything over to 26. It's an awesome day for everybody that's signing, everybody's committing in all these college recruiting departments.
So let's give it a little shout out here because it's not just Mark Pantoni. He's obviously the driver of that bus, but Parker Wereb, who's the football recruiting assistant, he does a great job. One of the program assistants, Ryan Mayhew, he does a great job. They just lost Morgan Phillips to LSU last night, going back after 6 months with the Buckeyes, but she did a great job while she was here in the 1 year, kind of putting everything together. She was the director of recruiting and events. Obviously, assistant director of recruiting strategy, Nick Murphy, he does a great job. And then Garen Duhart, who gets a lot of credit for a lot of recruitments behind the scenes as well. Like, those guys work really hard. And, there's plenty of other people we should name, but those are just a few of the names that come to mind because they do a really nice job. And I think it's funny because Brian Hartline deserves a lot of credit for, like, receivers. And Keenan Bailey deserves a lot of credit for recruiting, like Nate Roberts out of Oklahoma. But these recruiting staffers are behind the scenes making sure that everything goes smoothly so those assistant coaches can get the credit for the recruiting wins. And those assistants deserve a lot of credit for building those relationships and making sure that those guys want to come play for them. But the recruiting department in general, I just think we don't talk about enough. And at times like this, when the cycle officially wraps up, when Steve releases this list of the off-field stars, like, that's when you should be giving these guys their flowers because they can finally take a little bit of a breath for like 2 weeks during this dead period and recharge and then get back at it with hosting visitors in March and April for spring practice. And so I think that this is a good time to kind of just shout those guys out before we officially get started here on the Lettermen Lounge podcast, Mick.
Yeah, I think great call out by you. And you mentioned you mentioned really the meat of the recruiting department right there. And that goes even higher and lower. Like Garen Duhart is a defensive back assistant. He helps on the field, but he's also big in the defensive back recruiting. Riley Larkin, who has since departed the program to go to the NFL, was big in recruiting Tavian St. Clair to Ohio State. He was also big in recruiting Brady Edmonds, the 2027 quarterback commit. You also have a guy like Tony Johnson, who is very beneficial in helping Carlos Locken put together this 3-man running back class. Well, Alan Clark, who's also left the program now to go take an on-field role at Texas, he was big in getting Zion Grady and some of these defensive tackles, Jarquez Carter, into the fold, and so on and so forth. There's different guys, Sam McGrath, Sean Bickness. I could go on and on about different Devin Jordan at wide receiver, Mike Salini, who has left to become the UNLV offensive line coach. A lot of these guys that are GAs or offensive analysts play a big role because they also help build relationships. And then we can't even start naming all the people that when it comes to on campus, if Devin Sanchez and his parents show up on a Sunday, they have a person that is with, or a Saturday, they have a person that is with them for those full 2 days on campus that is just a student intern working, hosting visits, walking through the facilities. So shout out to all those people. And you meant Billy Fessler's another one. If we'll roll right into that. Some of these guys are, like I said, Mark Pantoni was on the road when the coaching staff wasn't on the road, but Jim Knowles leaving the coaching staff left the spot open on the road. So last week when Ohio State went out and was on the road seeing prospects, Billy Fessler, the assistant quarterbacks coach, who was also the quarterbacks coach at Akron, was going to work under Chip Kelly at UCLA. He was on the road last week visiting prospects, was in Pennsylvania seeing Peyton Falzone, who was a former Virginia Tech commit that visited this season. Nathan Bernard, who's from Ashland, Ohio. He also visited Matt Potaski from Cincinnati Moeller, who Michigan offered on Tuesday evening. And then the biggest one that I think he visited and offered, and we can kind of talk about more, is Bo Bentley at you and I would probably say it's Salina. I don't know if it's Saline or Salina, Texas down there. He played in the 2025 U.S. Navy All-American Bowl, and he's a guy that I think a lot of people are really excited about in 26. And Ohio State issued an offer last week after Billy Fessler got to see him. So as we kind of roll into these assistants, we also have to acknowledge that they were out on the road, and that was one thing about them being on the road that kind of caught my eye was the Bo Bentley offer.
Yeah, so obviously the Buckeyes now in the dead period. So you would think like, well, there's not a lot of recruiting to talk about. Well, guess what? There still is. Okay, just bear with us here because the Buckeyes need an offensive coordinator. The Buckeyes need an offensive line coach. They also now need a defensive coordinator. They also need at least to replace one defensive coaching staff member because Jim Knowles departed. So no matter what they do, whether it's an internal promotion or they hire an external defensive coordinator, somebody's got to come in. They've got to hire two offensive coaches because no matter what they do with promotions internally or go external for hires, two coaches have to come in. So there's a lot that has to happen. Oh, by the way, like you said, Alan Clark now gone from the defensive line room. So they need an assistant defensive line coach. They need another quarterback's assistant because Riley Larkin left, like you said. They probably need another recruiting director for recruiting and events because Morgan Phillips is gone. It's a lot right now, a lot of staff turnover, and this affects every aspect of the program. Obviously, the Jim Knowles departure doesn't affect the recruiting as much because he was more of a ball caller, not a recruiter, and that's okay. That's what he does, and he'll do that at Penn State really well, and we'll see him November 1st. But I think it's more important, like, everybody's talking right now, Mick, about this offensive line class because in 2026, the in-state offensive line class is so good. And now the Buckeyes are replacing the offensive line coach when these recruitments finally seem to be turning into Ohio State's direction. Well, now Ohio State's got to repair those relationships, keep those relationships together in the post-Justin Fry era now that he's with the Arizona Cardinals, get a new offensive line coach in there and reestablish those relationships so these in-state offensive linemen don't slip out of their grasp and go somewhere else like a Clemson or somewhere, God forbid, like a Michigan. So it's going to be really important for Ohio State here in the next couple of weeks to, despite being in the dead period, maintain these relationships, let Ryan Day work with these guys and understand like, hey, we're going to hire a really good offensive line coach and you're going to want to be here because that is so critical right now to the 2026 class as we spin this thing forward.
Yeah, I mean, Justin Fry was setting up to have probably his best offensive line recruiting class in 2026 because of the in-state guys, because of the out-of-state guys that he had now been recruiting for 2 or 3 years. And we can say what we want about relational-wise or how his misses were on the recruiting show. Justin Fry builds good relationships, so when you give him 2 to 3 years to recruit a guy, he was going to be successful in that. And I think you saw that with guys like Micah Smith, Deron Parks down in Florida, and obviously their kind of recent surge with Jackson Cantwell, who I believe is still going to be a top target. Ryan Day visited him last week, first stop on the recruiting trail. I know that kind of caught your eye, so we can talk about that more in a little bit. But yeah, offensive line wise, I wrote about it on Sunday, right where it kind of when Chip Kelly was departing, so it was kind of a weird time for it to go out, but it came out, and I just think that the whole 26 recruiting stuff for offensive line comes to a standstill now. You had Ryan Day who visited. Ryan Day was supposed to visit these guys at their high school during the contact period in January last Monday, but that's also when he had to then do the Kelly Clarkson show, and then he had to do Jimmy Fallon that night. So the media tour kind of caught Ryan Day. Originally, I was told by Max Riley's dad that they were expecting to see Justin Fry and Ryan Day that Monday. Obviously, when Ryan Day gets pulled for media obligations, he no longer gets to make the rounds in Avon Lake and Archbishop Hope to see Sam Greer. Justin Fry even saw Adam Guthrie down in Miami Trace that day. So all three of those stops no longer get made by Ryan Day. And the rest of the week he was down in Missouri, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, and Florida, and then finished up a little bit in Central Ohio on Friday. So there wasn't a lot of time to then go see those guys. But Ryan Day has started building their relationships with them. All three of those in-state offensive linemen plus legacy offensive lineman Mason Wilhelm were at the national title celebration the Sunday after winning. So Ryan Day met with all three of them individually to kind of get some sit down and just become a part of the recruitment, not knowing what the future was for Justin Fry, but to say, hey, I'm going to have a relationship with you guys so that way we can kind of speed this recruitment process up and get things going. I think Max Riley was trending towards a February decision. I don't know if that's still going to hold with Ohio State not having an offensive line coach. It very well could, and if it does, that might give Clemson a favor. But I also think Ryan Day and Ohio State will be well positioned with Max regardless, because I think he likes the opportunity to stay closer to home, the opportunity that Ohio State offers him. But yeah, it really falls upon Ryan Day's shoulders, Mark Pantoni's shoulders. Another guy that we didn't mention earlier, Sam Petito, who another guy in the recruiting department, Nick Murphy, like you mentioned. All those guys now have to kind of pick up the slack relationship-wise with the parents and the players on the offensive line, along with Ryan Day, to kind of get this thing to stay afloat for a little bit until you get the offensive line coach, which could happen by the end of this week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It could happen in March. I don't know really what the timeline is, but until that happens, you're kind of in a standstill with moving forward in these recruitments, I guess was how I would put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's not Ryan's fault that he got pulled away. And I think everybody would understand when you win a national championship, your media obligations kind of go up. So these in-state guys, it's like, well, would you rather him have not won a national championship and then been able to come see you? You know, you kind of understand a little bit, and I think they probably do. One guy that Ryan Day did go see, like you said, was Jackson Cantwell, the number one offensive lineman in the country. When you have an in-state class like this and you've built these relationships that you know are going to last with the in-state guys, you know, whether it's Riley, whether it's Greer, whether it's Guthrie, even the guy who's committed to Oklahoma now, like Will Conroy, like when you have these relationships already built in, insulated in-state, you can start to go take these big swings nationally. And I think Ryan Day probably talked to these guys and said, like, hey, I'm going to go talk to this guy. You know, hope you understand. And he went to Missouri, and the first person he saw, the first recruit he saw after winning the national championship was Jackson Cantwell. That is absolutely on purpose. That is by design. Like, hey, you are the number one player I wanted to see after winning the national championship. That only goes to one player from one program a year. It's very difficult to achieve that feat. It's even more difficult to be the recruit that gets called upon to see the head coach directly following that feat. So I'm very intrigued by where Ohio State stands with Jackson Cantwell. Obviously, the Buckeyes have to put a fence around Ohio and do a good job of recruiting those 3 in-state offensive linemen, even 4, if you would count, you know, a couple others here, whether it's Wilhelm or whether it's the Oklahoma commit, Will Conroy, which, you know, we could talk about that, I guess, at some other point. We don't even have to talk about him today. But when you have such a good class in Ohio, it affords you the opportunity to go take these big swings nationally. And I think that's what you saw Ryan Day do. It's like, hey, I know that I'm going to have these relationships here, but I need to make this a priority because we need a 5-star in here, you know, to start to really solidify the future of this offensive line. So I understand why Ryan did what he did. And I understand the message that it sends to a guy like Jackson Cantwell of like, hey, we just won it, and now I wanted to see you first. Like, I actually really enjoy, or I like that Ryan decided to do that.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned, it was communicated to these guys on Sunday at the national championship celebration, hey, you're going to get 20, 30, 40 minutes with me on Sunday because I can't give that to you on Monday. We're going to go do a media tour, and then we're going to go see Jackson Cantwell. And I think the other thing with the Jackson Cantwell thing, and we can't really avoid it nowadays in college football recruiting, is there going to be an NIL component. I mean, he is signed with a legitimate sports agency. I believe he's rep by Rhodes and House Sports. So we're not talking about a Twitter agency or anything here. He has legitimate NIL representation. And that's what's going to be required to land these type of guys. And that's the other thing I kind of wrote about long term with Justin Fry leaving. I think there's a part of Ohio State that kind of needs to evolutionize how they recruit offensive linemen, get more involved in paying up on some of these offenses. I think they've come close to doing it a couple of times. I think they've stopped short of just going over the hill to try and pay some of these guys. And obviously that's a program decision, paying guys really early when they're young. Like as Spencer and I kind of talked about with a couple of guys beforehand, if you pay them early young, you're going to have to pay them even more as they progress and start playing. So that's a cost benefit, but 5-star offensive linemen hit at a decent clip nowadays. So maybe that's something that's worth it. But regardless, I'd like to see him kind of not only offer, but take more offensive linemen per class. He only took 3 in 2025. I'd expect with Justin Fry, I was fully expecting to take 5 or 6 in 26. Now, if you get a new offensive line coach, I still think you should try for that number, but you just need to take more bodies, offer more of these bodies, because as I wrote, you only have so many bodies that are on this planet that are 6'4" to 6'8", 270 to 300 pounds. Like wide receivers, it's a lot easier to limit down your board because those body types are everywhere. Offensive linemen, you need to kind of expand it, offer and take as many guys because that's a limited number. And I think that's why you saw Ryan Day kind of prioritize it on the recruiting trails. Let's go see Jackson Cantwell right away because he's a star. On Thursday, I believe he saw Micah Champ-Smith, who's another guy in the state of Florida, who's a top target. So of the handful of days Ryan Day was spent on the road, saw a lot of offensive linemen, saw a lot of defensive backs as well. Jackson Cantwell was the first stop. The next 2 stops were to see Braylon Womack in Mississippi and Blaine Bradford in Louisiana. I believe they're 2 of the top 3 safeties in the 26th class. So I think that's a big need for Ohio State along with the offensive line because you signed Fahim Delan last cycle, but you're going to lose Caleb Downs. You're going to lose some of these guys that are older in the program. So landing top safeties to replace them is something that is very important for Ohio State in the 26th class. And I think Womack especially is at the top of that list. And I know he's at the top of the list for Spencer Holbrook when it comes to guys that Spencer gets excited about in the 26th class.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite prospects. Watched him in camp this summer and was just like blown away. There's not really a comp right now because I'd like to see him again because I only saw him once. So it's like, maybe he just had a good day. You won't want to make a comp. Like I'm not going to be like, oh, this guy's the next Caleb Downs. Like, just not going to do that because I don't think there's going to be another Caleb Downs. Like that guy's a freak. But I think he's a really good player. Let's get into this before we get out of here. We're not going to spend an hour here talking. We could, if you want us to, drop a comment down below. Tell us that you want us to spend an hour here. We'll talk about recruiting for an hour. I'll do it. Don't make me do it. I'll do it. But anyway, quarterbacks, Mick. Chip Kelly, gone. Riley Larkin, gone. Ryan Day's still there, which is a pretty big deal. Brady Edmonds is already committed. Obviously, Tavian St. Clair, he's not going anywhere. That's pretty well known. The 2026 class is pretty interesting, in my opinion. What's the latest here? Because you need a quarterbacks coach if you're Ohio State now. You already got one as your head coach, but you need a quarterbacks coach. These guys were being recruited by Chip Kelly, and now they're not because he can't recruit for the Raiders. So what are you hearing out there about the 2026 quarterback pursuit? And then how's Brady Edmonds doing in this 27 class with the news that Chip Kelly's not going to be his quarterbacks coach? Which, if he thought that Chip was going to be around long enough to be his quarterbacks coach, he probably was a little mistaken there in that thought process.
Yeah, and that was directly after the news happened. I communicated about 24 hours later. I don't like to interact with these guys in the aftermath because it can still be raw. But Brady acknowledged right away, hey, he's an NFL guy that spent time in the NFL. He was likely going to go back there at some point. And I think that's why you saw, even if Ryan Day didn't know Chip Kelly was going to get a job, he knew that there was the possibility of it. So that's why when Jim knows that your defensive coordinator leaves, they say, let's send Billy Fessler, our assistant quarterbacks coach, on the recruiting trail. We'll have 2 guys looking at quarterbacks. Chip Kelly was primarily on the West Coast, saw Brady Smigel, saw a couple other guys out there, but then, like I said, you had Billy Fessler, who saw a guy in Pennsylvania, saw a couple guys in Ohio. Chip and Billy Fessler made the trip down to Nashville to go see Jared Curtis, the 5-star quarterback out of Nashville Christian School, did the in-home visit with him. It seems like that went well. Hoping to catch up with him here soon when Spencer and I make a trip down to HQ, on 3 HQ in Nashville. So we'll hopefully have more. And then, like I said, 2 new offers go out last week. You offer Bo Bentley out of Salina, Texas, a guy that's really risen up after his All-American Bowl performance. And you offer a guy at Ryder Lyons, who out of Folsom, who's one of the top quarterbacks in the 26th class. The caveat for him being that he's going to go on a mission. So he's essentially a 27 quarterback. So like you said, 26 quarterback search gets really fascinating. I think you'd like to see, it really depends on who's going to visit in March and for this spring period. Is it Brady Smigel that gets up, the former Florida State commit out of California? Is it Bo Bentley that gets up? Who are these guys? Is it Brady Palmer, a guy out of San Diego that they offered a while ago? Is he going to come up and visit? There could be other guys too. They've recruited other guys. There's other guys across the country that they've went and seen. I imagine Nathan Bernard from Ashland will make another trip down. Peyton Falzone, who's been working with Brad Mandler, the same guy that worked with Drew Alder and a couple of these other Power 5 quarterbacks, Ryan Montgomery. He's been working with him, making flights to go see him from Nazareth to Cleveland. So I imagine Peyton will also visit this spring. They'll also be out to see him again, throw in the spring. But that's the 26th search, like you said, with Brady. Brady Edmonds is locked in 27. He actually sent me a message unprompted last week, I believe, where he just said, hey, do you know of any 27 prospects that are really high on Ohio State right now? And because I'm trying to get a whole day together in April just to go see all these guys, just for us to visit together. So Brady's already trying to organize his own visit day. Duvet Williams is the guy that Brian Hartline offered, out in California, who is the number one cornerback in the 27 class. But Brian Hartline liked him as a wide receiver. Him and Brady have known each other from playing youth football in California. So whenever Brady visits next, I'd expect Duvet Williams to visit next. I think Maxwell Hiller, who's the number one interior offensive lineman at Coatesville, Pennsylvania, likely will make the trip when Brady Edmonds makes that trip as well, because they've already kind of been talking. Brady's started running to Jameer Brown, the Huber Heights Wayne wide receiver, a little bit on the 7-on-7 circuit. And I think Brady's also started to get in the ear of D'Angelo White, who's one of the top 2027 tight ends, and I know is perhaps the top target on the recruiting trail for Keenan Bailey, regardless of class right now. So quarterback recruiting is in a flux, but Brady Edmonds is recruiting on his own, and I guess we'll see in March who shows up to campus when it comes to the 26 quarterback search.
I can't even wrap my head around the 27 class right now. I'm still like in the 2025 mode, because I'm just so focused on like team stuff while you're handling all this recruiting stuff. And then to 2026, it's like, okay, I can kind of dive in here, make sure I know what I'm talking about here, make sure I know what I'm doing. 27, it's like, okay, well, Brady Edmonds. And then after that, it's, I don't know.
This is one of my favorite weeks, though, of the whole calendar year, because as somebody that toggles through the On3 database pretty often with offers and visits and everything, this is when we're going to officially start flipping everything over from the 25 cycle to the 26, when you first click on Ohio State offers and commitments. So that way you don't have to, even though the 25 cycle has been signed for a month, you don't have to toggle through the 25 guys and then get to 26. So it's a pretty fun nerd database day for myself, and I imagine some other people like Kyle Kelly and the other people that work at On3 on the different fan sites.
Nerds.
Hey, man, we're just all trying to get by.
I mean, I know like the names, and I could pick like the name and what they look like of like every walk-on on the team. So like I'm a nerd too, just with the roster. You're a nerd with the recruiting stuff. So it all comes out in the wash. I guess it all evens out.
Yeah, that's specifically why I brought up Maxwell Hiller, though, because if there's one position, folks, that Spencer likes to get ahead early on, Spencer's a big offensive lineman guy. So I imagine if I mention Maxwell Hiller, he'll give Maxwell Hiller a look. If I run the ball, I'm not going to run the dang ball, as Seth McLaughlin would say. Spencer does a lot of work on offensive linemen. He likes the trench play, so that's why he'll keep you guys updated on the offensive line search, and we'll have everything covered on all those coaching search positions, as Spencer kind of keeps tabs on it. Alex Gleitman keeps tabs on it. Pete Nagos pops in every now and then, has lists as well. So it's been one heck of a time, folks.
It's interesting. A lot to break down right now with this coaching staff, with the recruiting department. There's a lot of turnover going on right now, but hey, that's life at the top, baby. That's life at the top. You win a national championship, you're living large, you're living high on the hog, and all of a sudden everybody wants to come try to get on that perch. So everybody's going to be trying to poach your players. Everybody's going to be trying to poach your coaches. Ohio State pretty much perfectly survived the poaching players part of it. A lot of poaching of the coaches happened, and now they've got to reboot and make sure that they're ready to try to repeat in 2025, because here's the thing. At other programs, particularly some other Big Ten programs, it's okay if you win a national championship to just, go 7-5 or 6-6 or 7-5 the next year. But at Ohio State,
you're a billionaire. Some people, if you go have that record, it attracts a billionaire the next season.
But at Ohio State, even when they lose a couple games a year, the expectations are a national championship every single year. and they don't falter from that. So that's why we love covering this team, because the expectations are that high every year, and you, the fans, make the expectations that high. So we appreciate that, because you help us stay employed and you help the Buckeyes stay with what Jim Tressel and General Bob Carpenter and a bunch of other people from the program say. The standard is the standard. And the standard at Lettermen Row is the best Ohio State coverage on both the team side and the recruiting side. I try to hold my end of the bargain. Mick definitely holds up his end of the bargain. Alex Gleitman as well. That's life at Lettermen Row. Go to lettermenrow.com right now. Get your first 7 days for $1. Yep, we're still breaking down the national championship game. We got a lot of recruiting stuff, even though it's in the dead period. And then obviously these coaching searches aren't going to solve themselves. Mick Walker on the other side of your screen. I'm just Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Like the video below. Subscribe to the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. And then we'll see you becoming a member over at lettermenrow.com.